Welcome to episode 435 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and he's Emile Evanesian. And for the first time in like a month, Barcelona isn't playing a midweek game, which means, unfortunately, Emile, we have to talk about things we don't want to talk about, and maybe some things we do want to talk about at the end, though, too. But I feel like with Manchester United coming up next week, yeah, let's have it be a soft kind of, just a little news heavy, I guess, week, and then next week, we'll really get into all of the nitty gritty.
The on-pitch stuff. Yep, exactly. I mean, the one good thing is I guess there's never a slow news day or at least a slow news week with this club.
Well, I think when you're in a financial situation, which is a huge part of what we're talking about today, that is not the case. Then when you're also talking about one of the crown jewels of the academy, one of the best young players in recent history, in theory, kind of being on the chopping block, then that's going to create some news. And, we're talking about Ansu Fati today. We're talking about Juan Laporta. It's interesting. I want to start the Ansu conversation. I know people don't come here for their NBA takes, but I am kind of looking at this Ansu Fati stuff almost through the lens of the NBA trade deadline, because those things going to happen correlated or connected to each other in the same timeline, whatever it is. And for you, being a Laker fan, a team that completely just redid everything,
Yes.
I feel like the Lakers are an example of how Barcelona should be treating their business as like top teams do. But I always seem to align myself more to the small market teams, if you will,
Okay.
where, or you could even say I'm more like Daryl Morey and James Harden when it comes to Ansu Fati, where I feel like at 20 years old, coming up through the academy, it takes a lot for me to be okay with the idea of parting with him before having any idea of who he even is again, right? And just saying who he was at 16 and 17 and 18, that prolific player. I mean, even just 16 and 17 before he got hurt at 18, that prolific player is who he used to be. He's not that player anymore. We have to accept that. He's 20. It's only on the down decline, the downhill road from here. And I'm not ready to do that. So that's just my big general thoughts about Ansu Fati. I'm just not ready to do that. But I mean, the things we'll get into too is the financial part of it. Maybe I should be more like, again, the Lakers or a big market team, and say like Russell Westbrook or something like that. Like, hey, this guy is just this is who he is now. This is who he will be. And if Barcelona want to win titles, if you want to be a winning team, then you have to be able to part with the assets when they've depreciated in value.
So there's a couple of things. So I think it's interesting. We can kind of extend the the Lakers and NBA chat for just a second. So I think Russell Westbrook, and I mean the I guess the entirety of the LeBron era, but kind of through the prism of the arc of Russell Westbrook, kind of is both sides of the modern day Lakers team building philosophy, which is, they gutted what is now in hindsight, just a lineup of young all stars with Julius Randle and Brandon Ingram, and I mean, Kyle Kuzma's a good player. So I mean, they gutted everything to get Anthony Davis and subsequently Russell Westbrook, and I don't love that philosophy. I mean, I feel like there's no longer, a Lakers core. I mean, they're great players and it's fun to watch them sometimes, but like there is something to be said for letting good players be good and letting your stars mature. And subsequently, I mean, and so Russell Westbrook represented a massive, I guess a failure of that philosophy. And I think that's what so much of Barca's recent, and I think it really hit a fever pitch under Bartomeu, but I think there was always a notion of we're going to go get this 40, we're going to go get these three, 40 million euro midfielders, and each of them is pretty good. You're the Andre Gomes and Arda Turans of the world, and this and that. We're just going to pack the bench and the first two rows of the stands with these guys, and like, are they any good? I don't know, but there sure are a lot of them, and so. And I think this is where you end up in this situation. I like you for largely, I mean, emotional reasons, but I think also just for the more logical, pragmatic ones that you laid out. I'm not pro moving on from Ansu. Like he deserves a chance to get to get on the pitch. And I mean, I've said, and we've talked about this, I've beaten this drum throughout the season. And I always just go back to there was the one week where there was the Classico and there was a Champions League game against Inter Milan. And, you know, Ansu by that point was back. And, I mean, I think he's played 90 minutes, once this season? Something like that. And, like, there has to come a point. And I thought at some point, I've gotten very frustrated with the notion of casting him as a 20-minute super sub or whatever, because look, there's nothing to suggest that that is what he is as a player, so let him play. And the thing is too, if Barca has any interest in actually assessing what it is that they have, you have to play him. And I mean, I always go back to that one week. I was going to say, look, if you want to give this guy a chance to start both of these massive games and I mean, essentially challenge him to make his star turn that week. Just announce to the world that you're back and like this is what's happening. But I mean, they've treated him with such kid gloves, and I understand like you're not going to bench Lewandowski, and Dembele has been fantastic. So like I understand the lineup has picked itself a little bit, but I also think Barca has been less. I guess Xavi or whoever. I'm assuming it's Xavi. I don't think there's like directives coming from upstairs or anything like that. But I think Xavi's been overly cautious, which is probably great for it's great for Ansu's health. But we're no closer to knowing if Ansu is a global superstar, just a long-term star on the decline, whatever. And I. It would kill me to get rid of him before actually having anything resembling a real answer to that.
Well, the interesting thing is that there is a cognitive dissonance between what we believe and what I had hoped for and what the club and the player and the agent are all saying. Because while I had said at the start of the year, if Ansu, with all his injury problems, if he came back and had 10 goals and 6 assists or 11 goals and 5 assists, whatever it was, that I would say that was generally going to be a positive thing for me because of his age, because of coming back. But the club has said, hey, this guy is 100% fit. He is. The reports keep coming out that this guy is ready to go. And he has only played more than 70 minutes 4 times this season. To your point, he has played 90 minutes twice against Victoria Pilsen, which, again, I think many players could have played 90 in that game in a 4-2 win. And then he played 90 against Adafe due to the injury to Dembele 2 match days ago, match day 18. Match day 19, he goes 80 against Girona, right? Dembele injury. And then 74 minutes against Villarreal in that 3-0 win. His 2 goals against Real Valladolid at the start of the season, or not 2 goals, sorry. The Real Sociedad, I'm saying, with the 1 goal and the 2 assists. There we go.
Yep.
So those contributions at the start of the year in that 4-1 win, that was pretty much the moment for Ansu. Yeah. That was the time when he was all ready to go, and that was the second match of the entire season, right? And you say, what has he done for me lately? What has he done since then? Well, he has just 3 goals in 20 Liga appearances compared to 4 in 10 last season. Even when he was injured and coming back, he still had 4 in 10 and 4 in 7 during the previous campaign when he was also hurt. Again, this is year 3 where he's coming back, and it's just not working. And unfortunately, again, because he is fully fit, you hear from the agent, that being Jorge Mendes, somebody that with Mino Raiola having passed on, that Jorge Mendes is the super agent. He is the guy to know in world football. And with him whispering in his ear, of course, Mendes, the point of Mendes is to get as much money for his clients as humanly possible. And you could almost argue that at the time, Ansu did kind of accept, not say a lesser salary because it's going to continue to go up. It's a 5-year deal till 2027. But his number of 13.9-ish, right around there, is technically first behind Lewandowski as far as the players that have been re-signed or the contracts have been redone in the Laporta era. So we're not talking about De Jong's 37.5 or Busquets' 37 or even Alba's 20.8 or Lewandowski. Well, yeah, Lewandowski at 20.8 is the other big one. But yeah, so then it's Ansu at 13.9, Koundé at 13.5, and Rafinha at 12.5, with Dembele at 12. So you get the idea that Ansu does fit the new salary structure, but he fits it as basically the number 10 for FC Barcelona, and that's where he now lies in the numbers. So I think, too, Mendes is certainly at this point hearing out, because I think if they sell Ansu, we're going to get into the finance in a second, but if they sell Ansu for 100 million, based on
Yeah.
potential, based on what he was to Manchester United. It's one of those where you kind of just have to swallow it and say, yeah, I mean, I totally understand why that happened, why that deal was taken by the
Mhm.
club. Because again, going back to the NBA thing, the NBA operates on a salary cap. So the way
Yep.
that we always have to do Barca math is the way that football fans usually don't have to do Barca math. And that is almost with a salary cap, knowing,
Yeah.
well, because it literally is a league of salary cap. So for
Yeah.
Barcelona, if they're able to get 100 million for Ansu, then that's a deal you unfortunately have to take. But if he's going to be sold almost as damaged goods to get him playing time, because that's what Jorge Mendes wants, him to be a
Yeah.
starter somewhere, I think it's going to be really difficult for the club to say, hey, 25, 30 million euros to part with for this kind of player. I think that's a tough pill to swallow. But it's you and I understand our argument that we still want to see and give him time. But it seems like
Yeah.
agent doesn't want to give him time. And it seems like Barcelona is saying, hey, you're fully fit. Where is your production? Where are the things you're doing? Because statistically, I'll do that in a second after you respond.
Yeah.
But Ferran Torres is the player. It's so crazy. Ferran Torres is the player close to him in all metrics, right? And they're both on the same team.
You know, look, without knowing what the actual conversations are that are happening behind the scenes and in training and whatnot. Look, I understand why Mendez is, yeah, why he's agitating for the move that he is. I mean, that's how he makes money, and just especially if he can negotiate a huge deal with, particularly in an English club, huge transfer fee, probably presumably. I mean, I guess he'd just move on his current contract. So I mean, there presumably wouldn't be a ton of money to be made there. But I mean, so I understand where Mendes is coming from. Now, the club is saying that Ansu is completely fit. They don't always act like it, and I realize that there's something of a logjam in the attack, in attack for Barca, and like we talk about, um, like I mentioned and you mentioned, Lewandowski is essentially on the you know on the lineup sheet in pen every day. So okay, so he's there in ink. Um, Usman Dembele, as long as he's healthy and he's seems thankfully knock on wood perpetually in form, he's a must start. So there really is now just a feeding frenzy for one attacking spot in the team among a bunch of people. There hasn't been. I frankly don't. I don't think any of the non-Ansu attackers, while they've played well, I don't think anyone's put forth such an emphatic case to keep Ansu nailed to the bench. And more than anything, like Ansu is the most important player to assess, I think, on this club. Because I think, a lot of the young guys who, maybe still have a little bit of developing to do, we at least at this point know where they are physically, where they are in, technically and on their development curve. And, you can extrapolate and you hope for some development and growth. And, but you at least have some sort of reasonable idea. With Ansu, there are so many questions and it comes up so much, but there's just this dearth of playing time. And, you know, how are they? Someone's lying, right? I mean, Barca's either saying like, "Hey, we're declaring you fully fit. Why don't you step up and play all these minutes?" Or, you know, so this is where I kind of struggle. I've been. I mean, I just keep coming back to the same simplistic solution, which is, I mean, start putting the guy in, start giving him big minutes, and looking at within a couple of weeks, within 2 3 weeks, if he's just not up to it, if he's not that guy, it'll start to show itself. But like at some point, you have to find out.
Well, I think he's going to get those minutes now still with the Nibele injury because
Yeah.
he's competing with the idea of Kessié and with only four midfielders available because
Hmm.
Busquets is also injured. Xavi can only mess around with those pieces so much before
Yeah.
you're trusting Ferran Torres, who's even below Ansu on that depth chart, or you're already trusting Pablo Torre in the midfield to play as a backup attacking midfielder, or you're running Gabi and Pedri and stuff in the ground for 90 minutes, which is probably going to happen anyway. I think
Yeah.
even looking beyond this year to next year, I think unfortunately there is a world where Barca pays Yana Carrasco's 20 million euro purchase option and just live with him if they can sell Ansu for 75 million to Manchester United or something to make all those numbers work, which again we'll get into a second. But yeah, to for the Ansu numbers too, it is concerning though the fact that his goals per 90 are way low. So 0.35 now, which basically
Yep.
makes him average, right? He always had either it was 0.61 in his first year when he was 16, 0.84, and then geez, last year he was over one in goals per 90,
Yeah.
which is just again wild, and you can't expect it over the course of a season. I mean, well, you can if you're expecting it from a great player, but from a
Yeah.
regular player, a rotation piece, somebody who's even playing the regular minutes and starts that he's getting, expecting over one is pretty insane. But 0.35 is less than 0.5, which obviously, yeah, those are numbers, but 0.35 is lower than what you'd expect from Ansu even. Like you'd want almost any player at Barcelona for per 90, and yeah, they only score one goal a game because they that being Barcelona through a little stretch there.
Yep.
But you do unfortunately look at the expected goals then immediately, and his expected goals are higher than they've ever been. So his goals per 90 were
Hmm.
0.61 with expected goals 0.33 in his first year. It moved to 8.4 and then 0.37 in the second year, which is just a huge jump. And then again, last season was a over one and a 0.36. So he was always right around the mid, like 0.30 or the 30 percentile in expected goals. But then
Hmm.
goals this year is 0.35, but his expected goals are 6.3. So it has shifted quite a bit that he is missing, and he's not as clinical as he was, and that's what makes him look like kind of a shell of himself. But he's not too far even off the pace. I mean, last season, this is just counting La Liga, but he had 4 goals last year with 0 assists, and this year it's 3-3, right? And
Yep.
Barcelona are first in the table. And so that's the other big thing about the minutes point, though, is that he may get those minutes with Dembele out right now. Maybe he won't, but it's hard to argue that he should get those minutes, and why. And it's totally understandable why Kessié played when Busquets went out, because Xavi has finally made a system. He's built a system where he can look at multiple players and say, okay, I made the Gabi and Pedri and De Jong puzzle work. That makes sense. We got to keep it this way, do it this way. And even though Busquets got hurt, Xavi tried to it's easier, it seems, to move Pedri back to a pivot position than it is, and have Kessié play as a right interior, than it is
Yep.
to kind of rejig your formation and go back to a 4-3-3, something that Barcelona has not been as successful at this season, with the exception, again, of the Villarreal game where Ansu came on and played decently well. So my concern with Ansu, yeah, is that those numbers that are currently happening this season, if those play out over next season, there will be a bit of almost seller's remorse that Barcelona are going to say, well, we had that moment to get rid of him and we didn't. But yeah, as I said, for me, it's just sentimental at this point. I think they should look for Ferran Torres, look for a market for him, which even if you take a smaller number on him, it's a 5-year deal on Ansu. I think you just have to kind of push on. But if Jorge Mendes
Yeah.
pushes for the move, then I guess there is a number. And what is Barcelona's number? Which I think is a perfect transition, Emile. I'll give you the final word on Ansu, but I think it's a perfect transition to speak about Juan Laporta and Mateu Alemany. They had a lot to say. And I'm
Yep.
going to throw a lot of numbers at everybody in a second. If you thought those are too many numbers, I got more for you. So yeah, let's get a final word on Ansu there.
So I mean, I do agree with you. As far as where this might wind up with Ansu. I mean, the you never know. This might be the moment. This might be the moment where an English team is going to throw 80 million at you, and you can put a dent in the put a dent in pay off some debt, and bring down the payroll and do all of this, and make make Tebas happy, and
Yeah.
whatever. But like, and yeah, it's entirely possible. The next year nothing is better, and you're scrounging around to maybe scare up a 20 million offer for Ansu, if you're lucky. Um, I mean, I just keep coming back to, and I understand, some of my suggestions, I guess, or the way that I think about it, or at least the way that I would kind of, in my own twisted mind, do it in like FIFA or something like that, is, I understand the club doesn't want to, they don't want to sacrifice games, or like burn 4 or 5 games or whatever. But I think there does come a point where just kind of throw him into the water, see if he can swim. And just it's okay. Like it just injuries happen. Hopefully, God willing, it wouldn't happen to him, if you play him long minutes. But ultimately, you need to figure out if the guy you gave the number 10 shirt to, and you have on a long term, big money, for you in the new salary structure contract, like if he's the thing, and just let him get back in there. I mean, for the foreseeable future, I think he should be starting, and I think he should be playing 70 to 90 minutes and see what you got, because otherwise we're just going to be spinning our wheels, where it's just going to be, the club saying, like, we hope he can get back up there, and it's a bunch of people, but then in the end we never actually do the experiment. It's a lot of just ready, aim, 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 but just at some point, like, see what you got. So yeah, and I desperately want for the Ansu experience at Barcelona to work out. Like, I would love to kind of go back to those, those halcyon days of, what was it like? Uh, was it like 2019, 2020? Just, and, maybe it's there, but I keep saying it, like, we need to find out. Got to play him and find out.
Yep. Yep. And I think, again, just looking at the salary structure that he now
Mhm.
fits in, it's like one of those gambles that you can actually take if the transfer number is right. So speaking of those numbers, let's get into it. There was a press conference with Laporta and Alemany where they were speaking about the numbers. And to be honest with you, I've got just a huge amount of numbers in front of me
Uh-huh.
because of the rules that are changing. It's confusing. I don't think anybody knows what's happening. I think the fact that the club is constantly surprised, and I put quotes around that,
Mhm.
surprised by changes in the Liga and the way that Tebas says, okay, well, now it's going to be this way. So basically, what with the numbers that were said here, Alemany said that the adjusted cost of the 2021-22 season was 655 million euros, and that he estimates that this summer it will be between 750 and 470, which based on their income means that that being the wage bill is 60% of the income, which looking at other top clubs around the world right now, Real Madrid at 72%, City's at 64%. Right now, Barcelona themselves is at 72%. And United 66%, PSG is 109%, but they don't care. Chelsea's at 70%, Juve's at 87%, Inter 76%, Atletico Madrid 65%. So if they were to get down to 60% of their income, that would reach them back the 1-1 buy, where they don't have to sell €4 for every €1 they spent, right? So let's readjust that. The Porta then also followed up later and said that they went from a 1-4, which was the issue, to a 1-2.5. That was because the rules in November had changed to limit Barcelona's ability to use levers, those financial levers,
Yeah.
and basically sell portions of your not even portions of your club, but yeah, portion of the things around you that
The
aren't
stuff that's not tied down, basically.
exactly that isn't just income. So Laporta had said, as far as just the income and the wage bill, we've signed players for 250 million euros and sold 141 million. We made a competitive team for 74 million euros. We've reduced the wage bill by around 100 million, and we're planning to reduce it another 70 million. And so now the question becomes, how do Barcelona save 70 more million? Because the idea that they would have to wipe 150 million to 200 million euros from their total to counts against their income.
Yep.
That there's a lot of different things there. Like that's the point where we start to bring up why it hurt Barcelona so much to miss out on the Champions League uh,
Yes.
group stage money, right? Because that
Yep.
income counts towards that salary limit that's being set based on your income, right? That
Yep.
150 million to 200 million needs to be
Mhm.
reduced. That's why things like winning the Spanish Super Cup is small and minute, but helpful towards that. That is why getting to the Europa League final is helpful towards that. That's why
Yep.
if Barcelona and Real Madrid are talking about this preseason El Clasico in the United States and a preseason tour, that helps towards that. And that is why Laporta's concern, and I want to throw this monkey wrench in here, that is why Laporta's concern over the stadium renovation and the 93 million euros that will be lost per season by going to Montjuic. Because a reminder that top two attendances in world football are FC
Mhm.
Barcelona and Borussia Dortmund, 1 and 2. And so that gate revenue, like I always talk about, that killed Barcelona during the pandemic. It was
Yeah.
Bartomeu's. It was a pandemic and missing out on that gate revenue, museum revenue, all that revenue around the fanfare in Barcelona, missing out on that revenue on top of Bartomeu's bad decisions is really what put the club in the deepest hole that they would, because Bartomeu could have carried on, and and
Yeah.
then Barcelona would be Juve. But if anything, the pandemic basically made Bartomeu's ideas and his philosophies on transfers or whatever, lack thereof, completely unsustainable. Alemany also was saying how the departures of Griezmann and PK mean 90 million less in the cost of the squad. Which my question there is, when does that count against the squad? So does
Yeah.
PK's salary still counts for all of this season, right? That's still part of like why January it was almost impossible to sign anybody, because
Yeah.
PK's salary still counts against, because that projected budget had been approved at the start of the year, again with Barcelona making the Champions League. So you say, well, Barcelona did make the Champions League knockouts, so even if PK left, like those numbers don't balance out anyway. And La Liga wasn't going to change the rules for them in January. So it's like, what can they do in the summertime? Now, Laporta has also said about sponsorships, and that will also help generate fair play, because sponsorships are different than, again, selling some of your own assets as opposed to just deals that bring in extra income
Yeah.
in such a fashion. So that those new rules are to make sure Barcelona doesn't sell parts of itself, as opposed to getting better sponsorship deals that can bring in. And listen, once again, winning the Spanish Super Cup, winning trophies, winning La Liga, even winning Europa League, like those help all those sponsored deals. Like you have to take
So,
smaller numbers if you do not win, and that was
so
the
as
whole
I've
gamble.
heard it, as I've heard it, and I can't confirm this. I should have probably done, I should probably do my own homework on this. I can report back, but as I understand it, a combination of a La Liga win and Europa League win, so that 200 million shortfall
Mhm.
apparently ignores, kind of any money that might be incoming from, various titles, and but so as I understand it, I think winning La Liga and winning the Europa League would essentially bridge almost half of that gap, because it would be, and the money associated with that would essentially be an infusion of roughly half of that, and it would leave them, somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 million that they would have to cut, and which, is still kind of still some heavy lifting. But I mean, but if you go into the next season with, having won La Liga, and I understand winning the Europa League is hardly it's no cakewalk, especially, once you get into the latter stages. But if you can do that and, enter next season just simply without PK and Griezmann in the budget calculations, that should leave the rest of it as a fairly doable task. One
Well,
would
yeah,
think.
that 70 million that we're talking about here, that's kind of where some of my confusion lies. That
Yeah.
if they knew they're going to try to renew Busquets on a smaller number, again,
Mhm.
his 37 million euros per year is going to come up and be done. And if he does resign, it'll have to be a percentage or a fraction of that. I don't know what the limit, the minimum would be. Now, he would not accept the minimum, but looking at the other players around when with those renewals, like Roberto right now, for people who say get him out of the club, he's not good enough. He may not be good enough on the field, but he only makes 5 million euros. That being
Yeah.
right now, and he's going to renew at a lesser number. So you're talking about, maybe 2.5, or because again, once he renewed again under a smaller number, he's allowed to have just a certain minimum based on the contract he already has. So now I don't think he
Yeah,
could
you
go.
can't just like take a contract that's like, yeah, you can't just give your club like an 80%, because it was the whole thing. I
Yeah,
remember
basically,
when Messi was leaving,
exactly.
people were saying like, why doesn't he just agree to play for $1? And
Right, because you
even if
can't
he
do
was
that.
inclined
Right.
to, he couldn't. Yeah.
Right. So Roberto likely is going to resign for like 2.5 million euros, which is, insanely cheap for your 22nd or 23rd best player,
Yeah.
even when you're FC Barcelona.
And like a
Again,
solid veteran pro. Like if
yeah.
if nothing else, like even if he's not the best of players, like just what he's done in that sense is really, really commendable, rather than kind of holding the club to ransom and just saying, hey, just yeah.
Yeah, there's no but on Roberto, but
Mm,
my confusion comes
mm,
though on, we don't exactly know what Gabi's new number is. It's
yeah,
6.8 now. It likely is going to jump to be somewhere around Pedri, which is in the 9. Christensen, Ter Stegen,
yeah.
Kessier, they're all around 9. You want to talk about the Araujo deal? People worried about that. He's at just 7. So Araujo gave the club an absolute bargain.
That
So,
is
yeah,
that
give
is
that guy the
good
absolute
business. Like
armband. yesterday.
Yeah.
But anyway, so for Roberto, he's going to resign for a lesser number. But again, you're only really saving like 3 million. Even if he goes from 5 million to 2 million,
Yeah.
you're saving 3 million now. For Busquets, even I think the club is almost anticipating. Yeah, they want to get it down to 70 million. You get 37 off the books, but is he going to resign at 6, right, or 7 or something like that, right? So you're only saving 30 there, and then you still need to reach or 40 or something around there, especially if you're going to bring in a new player or two and put them on the books, right? If you go for Amrabat, we're going to talk about Vitor Roque in a second. But so Busquets comes off at 37. Let's say he goes back at 30. Now that's still 7 million euros, but you did save 30. Frankie de Jong at 37.5, and then Alba, who it was huge. He finally in an interview, maybe he said this before, but yesterday it seems like he actually came forward in an interview and said, "Hey, I'm going to restructure for that final season to help the club out because that's what they need
Yeah.
Alba to do." And he even at what is he 33 right now? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think he deserves an extra year after that. But if he's going to renew or if he's going to reduce his salary for his one final year and maybe he gets a +1 when he's 35, I mean, that's rough. But that situation Barcelona put them in, and then it's almost like a PK situation with Alba, where you go, "Hey, do you really want to be here? Is it? Do you really want to be hanging out,
Yeah.
or do you want to right? Or do you want to ride off in the sunset?" So right now, Jordi Alba's 20.8. Again, if he restructured his deal, you'd expect that he go down to like maybe 8 or something like that, or 9,
Yeah.
right, at his age or whatever. So if he's really helping the club out, and now you're saving 12 there. And then again, you're talking about Frankie de Jong at 37.5. Where can you get Frankie de Jong down to? The way the salary structure is built, you'd hope that you could get him down to even if he was second highest on the team, which is be like 14 or 15.
Yeah.
That's still a reduction of like 22 to 25 million euros
Yeah.
if you get him down that far.
Look, if you can
So
even get him, even if he's at the higher end of that, because I understand too. I mean, Frankie de Jong is, he's playing well. He's young. He's fit. You know what I mean? Like this isn't a PK Sergio Roberto Jordi Alba situation where you can almost kind of do the baseball arbitration thing and kind of you know hammer him with the logic of the case against him and
yeah,
hopefully get him to guilt him into giving back some money. No, I mean he's an excellent player, kind of at the peak of his at the in the prime of his career, at the peak of his kind of earning potential, and so I understand the concessions that he makes and the concessions that maybe are demanded of him might not be as great. But I mean, I'm even thinking if you can get him down to like that Lewandowski number, right? I
20.
mean, that's
That's
20,
17 million.
make
Yeah,
it 20.
18.
You save 17 there, and like you're saying, it's if you get some help from Jordi Alba and you get some help from Sergio Busquets, so all of a sudden you've potentially that's maybe anywhere from a quarter to a third of the
Yeah.
work that you have to do
Well,
is
yeah,
done.
as we were doing that math as we were going
Yeah,
along there, I think we got up to like 78 million. I think that's about right.
yeah.
So it is
Well,
doable. But again, Frankie de
and
Jong,
as it stands, you've already cleared a little bit of the decks. Like we just talked about with Griezmann and
even in
PK.
PK, yeah.
So that number and
But
look,
I bet you that when Laporta says we reduced the wage bill by 100 million euros, I think that's what he's talking about. I think he's talking about PK.
yeah, yeah,
Griezmann.
yeah,
Again, remember too, you're going to have to deal with Langley. I think in theory you're going to have to deal with Umtiti. So the numbers we also see are not totally finished, right? Like it's not like there are
yeah,
other players coming back to the club that you have to worry about. And then in that same response though, do you then offset that with? I know people like Nico Gonzalez. I like Nico Gonzalez, but the way he's gone at Valencia and the way that it seems like his career is going, do you try to offset the cost of Langley's wages wherever he goes next with Nico Gonzalez sale, right? Like those are the on the margins that it's incredible that around the margins you're talking about, especially with when it comes to like Barca B players too, or Barca Athletic players, that it's 1 to 2 to 3 million, and the club is like, I don't know about right. It's like those are the small margin ones where every euro counts. Like that seems to be the case. And for De Jong too. Again, unfortunately, I would expect, and we'll know how bad this is. Like by the club, I think by the time it's time to win trophies or not, if they've won trophies, I would expect almost no hit pieces about De Jong. And you talk a little bit about salary reduction, and maybe it'll happen, and that number might be higher, right? So I think the number of hit pieces on De Jong come the summer, based on the trophies they win and the income they generate, and then two, yeah, what that number means it needs to come down to. Because again, if they win all those trophies, then maybe the number only needs to come down to like 23, and they're only asking him for what is a reasonable like 14 or 15. I know this is crazy to say, but a 14 or 15 million euro per year deduction, which is still again huge over the course of that deal. You're asking him to forego 60 million euros, which is just like generationally like insane amount of money. Why would he do that? But that is different than if they miss out on some of those trophies, and now you're asking De Jong to go from 37 to like 14, right? And that extra 6 million over the course of 5 years is 30 million euros difference, right? So I think you might hear more hit pieces because I think the Catalan media is going to say, hey, De Jong, you were supposed to be the guy. Why didn't you step up? Why didn't you help Barcelona beat Manchester United? Whatever it is, right? Like, why didn't you step up? Why were you the midfielder you're being paid to be? And those hit pieces are going to be more. So that is my crystal ball projection on let the let the Catalan almost using the Catalan sensational papers to our advantage, right? Saying, why is that story existing? And then doing the numbers and saying, okay, if I do a little bit of math, I can figure out as to kind of almost, Sherlock Holmes my way into understanding why this player's in the doghouse or why, or at least in like the press, right? And all the sensational stuff. So I think that's where we land on that. I again, if anyone, I mean, again, Patreon Mike Crimmins is going to help me out at the end of the year when we also read a financial report because again, for the Man City stuff that was coming up, I wrote an article on it. You can read it on barcablog.com, how that affects Barcelona, but it doesn't. For as hard as Barcelona, I will say this is a safe space. We're Kool-Aid's here, but as much as Barcelona was dragged through the mud by their hair about the levers, about just becoming a meme for their finances, Barcelona comes out with a financial report every season. And if you actually weed through the report, which some socios don't even do, if you weed through the report, like I've tried to do, and I'm not an expert, but again, Mike and others who I speak to are, then you will understand with transparency, quite a bit of transparency, what the club is dealing with. The only thing that Kool-Aids and socios do not have transparent understanding of is the negotiations behind the scenes. Like what kind of numbers for Spotify was Laporta actually talking about, right? Like what did he forego? What else did he have on the table? How much money is he actually like negotiating with some of his Catalan friends, right? Like how many relationships is he helping out that wind up being on the salary report? And you're like, wait, what is that? Oh, that's frustrating. Why didn't he take a better deal, right? Like those are the things that you can transparently look at and be frustrated with Laporta. Also with before those reports come out and before the things happen, he is kind of a pathological liar. It's true, but he's also a pathological liar. There we go. That it seems to always have the best interests of the club at heart anyway. Even if he gets a little bit himself for being president of FC Barcelona and helps them out, he still seems to always want to make sure that the club is winning. And at the end of the day, Kool-Aids, they all want the same thing. The club to financially survive and they want to win. Like that's what they want. It's a membership owned club in a way that Man City and all the rest are not. And that's why Man City is going to take 2 to 3 to 4 years to have any understanding, any transparency whatsoever, if that even happens, because that's all going to be classified information. Those classified documents, things like that, you will have no idea the way that Man City has run their club over the course of 3 to 4 years. All you're going to know is that they get a huge influx of cash from a sheik, and that's all there was. And you can't know any other, right? And so I think for as much as Barcelona is being dragged, it's Barcelona's transparency that makes them so easy to drag by all these experts that say, hey, Super League bad, that's what I know. And so I'm going to come from the top rope and say, hey, Barcelona, Real Madrid, you guys want the Super League, but you're in trouble with your own league in the Liga. You've got all these problems. How dare you throw stones at us? And that's what it becomes. It becomes very tribal, side to sides. So as I always say, I said about the Man City stuff, I'll say about the Barca finances. Barcelona got themselves in this mess. They are not free and clear of judgment. But in the same regard, all those limitations in the Liga, all the fact that the Liga is so far behind the 30 years of broadcasting power that the EPL has built, right? The EPL has positively put themselves in that situation, but they have also allowed foreign power, not even foreign power, but they have also allowed dark money and everybody else around the world to come into their house and buy their product. American businessmen too, and billionaires or whatever. They've allowed everyone else to buy their league because their league is profitable. And so, like, don't tell me that Spain is all about like the money or whatever, because it's not. The EPL is about the money, and that's why they have such a great product. But I mean, Spain didn't make it about the money when they probably should have at times, right? And so you're asking those moral things are questions that EPL clubs are not asking, like about being owned by your own members, about being owned by socios, about having your annual reports voted on. Like the EPL clubs don't worry about that. That's something that Spain, like Spanish clubs in particular, have to worry about. So I'm kind of frustrated because at this point in the
Yeah.
finance talk, in all the whatever the transfer talk,
Mm.
we are legitimately talking about apples and oranges who all play in the
Yes.
Champions League together. Because the Champions League is that fruit. What are those called? The cornucopia? What is it? The
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
This is
Not
yeah,
a cornucopia.
like
What's it
those big the horns. Yeah, yeah.
called? Horn? Whatever it's called. So
Yeah,
that's what
yeah,
it
the
is.
cornucopia, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's the apples and the oranges, but those Champions League is the melting pot for all of that stuff,
Yep.
and that can be frustrating because now we're not having the same conversation across the line. So, Neil, I'll give you again the final word on that, and then we'll just wrap up the show real quick with some Vitor Roque talk.
Yeah, I do think it's you bring up a good point with the transparency, and it's understandably the Spanish league, particularly in the not so much the 80s, 80s and 90s, and then again there was another wave in the I think the first decade of the 2000s. I mean, not the biggest of the clubs, although Barca's hit their own skids kind of at points in the 80s and around the turn of the century and things like that. And a whole lot of other clubs have slammed into financial barriers, and whether had to go under or be kind of reborn or saved and things like that. So I actually completely understand that, given that sort of you don't want to say legacy, but that history of financial difficulty, and Spain's had it, Italy's obviously had it, France had an entire wave of it in the 90s. So I understand where the Spanish league at some point decided to draw a line and say that, look, I mean, we can't. There has to be some, I don't know, some guidelines. There has to be some sort of limit. Otherwise, we can't just have you maxing out the credit cards and declaring bankruptcy whenever you see fit. So in a vacuum, I think it's actually a great thing. But the problem, yeah, it exactly comes up when you start talking about player movement and European competition, because there is, I mean, virtually. I mean, I know there is oversight in England, but no one seems to actually care. I mean, just every handful of months, and I'm pretty sure if you Google, you can probably find one every week talking about how teams in the second tier in England in the Championship are essentially just leveraged beyond
Yeah,
any semblance of a healthy point. Now I understand your average championship team is wealthier than all but probably what three or four
yeah.
teams in Spain
But and isn't that
in
the
terms
point?
of revenue, I suppose.
Isn't that the point
But
that the Spanish league, all of the Spanish leagues, are tied directly to the power of the euro in Spain? Like, look at the
yeah,
third division where Barca Athletic play. Apparently, they're almost out of money completely because, again, while the health and economy, the total GDP of Spain
mm,
and the health of Spanish football
mm,
is directly tied to that, because we talked about the championship and down in that English football pyramid, that is tied to the socioeconomic effects of Brexit, of
yeah,
having membership owned clubs,
yeah,
and smaller clubs that are legacy clubs that have been around for a long, long time that have unfortunately had to look for foreign investment elsewhere. But again, that foreign investment comes in when you're in the EPL, and the minute you get down to the Champions League, they don't want to be there anymore. Like, so when
yeah.
we talk about Bolton, we talk about Wigan, right? Like that happens, and that happens in Spain too, though. Like, it's not, and when it happens in
Oh yeah, I
Spain,
mean,
though,
it
that's
was,
the other thing too. Like when Peter Lim of Valencia, when it happened in Spain, it's awful because you talked about the early 2000s. Valencia won La Ligas. They were in
yeah,
the Champions League
yeah,
final. Like when you talk about Valencia, it's a proud club, and then Peter Lim comes in, and I mean I can't believe they haven't been relegated yet at this point, right? The way he just kind of tried
yeah.
to
It's
scrap
absolutely
them
amazing.
apart.
But
So I mean that's the whole thing where
well,
like,
there was Malaga too. I mean, there was the
oh
moment
yeah,
where Malaga looked like the next whatever mega club.
Ameria right now, like Ameria's in their
Yeah, yeah,
peak
yeah.
of their figuring it out, and the minute investment is gone, that's
Yeah,
it.
and there was Deportivo La Coruña around the
Mhm.
I mean they got a La Liga title out of it, but it
And they're in the third
also
division now. They're
yeah it
they're
absolutely
in
landed
danger of
them
dropping
in
down to the
financial
fourth division.
ruin. Yeah,
I mean, if Deportivo La Coruña falls down to the fourth division, I mean, that club
that,
might even fold. I mean, so yeah, to your point, yeah, totally. It's like the EPL is they're playing a global game now financially, and it seems like Spanish clubs, Barcelona, Real Madrid, the exceptions, but because they have global fan bases, but everybody else around them. And now I can't believe I'm defending Tebas with this, but Tebas is trying to fight for the interests of those Spanish clubs, right? And so again,
yeah,
like those Spanish clubs are also fighting against salary limitations and also in huge consideration. So it is frustrating because we can't even begin, Emile, today to talk about the Super League conversation. But that Super
Right.
League conversation is on the fact that Real Madrid and Barcelona are trying to fight and compete with the EPL while they are a part of the Liga, who, again, we're talking about this year even. Look at Sevilla. Look at what Real Betis and Real Sociedad, what happened to them in the off seasons, that those clubs are not going to be able to compete at all in the
Yeah.
Champions League in 5 years' time. Like that's where we're going. Like the clubs to really look at, and that is why I tell people watch the Liga. Like if when I saw those 11s from the season, mid-season, whatever come out, if they did not have Bryce Mendes in there from Real
Yeah.
Sociedad, that tells me you didn't watch enough La Liga this year. Like
Yeah, you're not paying
that was a
attention.
vindication
Yeah.
to me because he's been fantastic. He kind of soiled the bet against Barcelona in the Spanish Super Cup, but I mean that wasn't about La Liga. So all right,
That happens. Yeah. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And, when it comes to the Tebas thing, like, he has, I think he understands his constituency. I mean, in the sense that, I mean, he knows that, Barca and Real Madrid and, maybe to a lesser extent, Atletico de Madrid and, whatever, on occasion, maybe Sevilla when they're winning the Europa and this and that, he understands that that's what kind of keeps the lights on at La Liga. But, to his credit, I will say that, yeah. I mean, it's not a thing that I say all, very often, but to Tebas's credit, he does seem to acknowledge that there really are a whole bunch of other teams, and he's not just a water boy for the the 3-4 mega clubs, and telling the rest of the league to just suck it up and deal with it.
mm-hmm.
And I think the one interesting thing is, you mentioned the Barca gets dragged so much, because of the transparency. I mean, yes, they're really getting dragged because a whole lot of bad decisions were made and money was handled
Yeah.
irresponsibly. But it's that transparency that's brought it to light. I mean, I think the
Well,
thing
it's
with
frustration too because if they hadn't spent 250 million euros on Lewandowski and Koundé and
yeah
all those players, and they just kind of battened down the hatches, then
yeah
they would probably not have an issue in January. They probably would not have an issue. They would have solved their own problems already financially. But
yeah.
again, like, people they don't take into account that because they don't care if Barcelona wins or not, but they don't take into account that Barcelona winning is part of the equation, like it's part of their income and things like
Well, so
that.
I actually just I was looking at it earlier, and the last season. So apparently, Barca received somewhere in the neighborhood of like 115 million, from La Liga, and Atletico de Madrid apparently won. So Atletico de Madrid apparently got 158 million. So the difference would have been 44 million euros, and so that's the potential, the sort of the marginal difference between being third and first in this league. So a little bit of the you have to spend money to make money in this business philosophy makes sense. And the one thing that I keep thinking about with Manchester City, and I mean, I think it's true of PSG, and there's probably a couple others out there, but they're the big two. Is like, I think when this sort of thing comes out too is, and this is going to sound bad, but I mean, I guess whatever. I guess it's probably meant to. I think it's we don't really hold those two teams up to particularly high standards. It's like we know what's going on there. Like we know what your deal is. The problem is that I think the sort of the member owned clubs and stuff like that. There's and people talk about it a lot. Barca's very sort of self satisfied with the Messi owned club and just sort of playing the we're the heart of Catalonia sort of thing
Mm-hmm.
when it serves, and but also more than happy to you know basically run afoul of that when it suits them. But I think that's also where Barca gets smacked around a little bit. Is Man City and PSG they have no compunction about just being like the bad guys, and like we know what your deal is. I think a little bit of Barca's thing is like the playing up of the purity, and and look, to their credit, they're
Yeah, yeah,
trying
yeah,
to
right, right.
work their way out of these problems.
Yeah, yeah.
But
No,
you
that's
know,
true. That's true.
and
It's
people are sort of, I think people are enjoying that a little bit. It's look, I'm a Lakers fan. There is just astoundingly little sympathy for my ilk online,
yeah.
and just so the Kool-Aids are catching the business end of of that, you know?
Yeah, I know. I'm in New York. I'm around a lot of Yankees fans, and I just I won't hear it. I'm not. I don't care.
Yeah.
Don't tell me when the last time you won a title was. I don't want to hear it. I don't care. All right. So speaking of
Yeah.
future titles, though, let's end the show by talking about Vitor Roque real quick. 17-year-old Brazilian forward, center forward who plays for Atletico
Yeah.
Paranaense.
Yeah,
Um,
Paranaense,
from
yeah.
that. Yep. So 17-year-old will be 18 at the end of the month. So in like 18 days. So Barcelona are trying to get that deal pretty much done now because once he turns 18, not to say that even more clubs are going to start talking to him. Clubs are already aware, but he's the push to get him to Europe is going to be a little harder. Positive things for Barcelona is it seemed like, unlike Endrick, this player is willing to come to Barcelona and fit their salary structure. He wants to do that. His agent is Andre Curry, who is a former scout for Barcelona. It seems like the family is cool about that too. And so, as far as what player he will be, and, I wrote an article again. Barcablog.com. I'm also like redoing the site. So check out over there. I've got a bunch of article stuff, some new writers as well working over there. But as far as where he's going to fit, we talked about all the salary stuff. If people said for 30 million euros, it's crazy to spend 17 million, but very much like Chelsea is kind of getting away with it, if you will, because the amortization on their contracts. It seems like it'll be 30 million euros plus add-ons paid over the course of like 3+ or 4 years. So over
Okay.
4 years, if you consider him just a 10 million euro transfer, and then you pay the 10 million on top of whatever the salary is for
Yeah.
him, which because he's a young player should be a little bit lower. There is a world where you very much like what we're seeing what Real Madrid have done for Rainier and Rodrigo and Vinny Jr. Like it sounds like there's a lot of risk, but for a as highly touted a Brazilian prospect as this is, like Vitor Roca, just to let people know, is basically the number two behind Endrick. It's been a big gap as far as like you're talking about the potential. Endrick's also a whole year younger. But when you're talking about like the U20s and the U17s for Brazil, Vitor Roca has now 2 or 3 years on been considerably, pretty high up there. And as far as first team sample size, he has scored 7 goals in 36 appearances already, helping his team to the Copa Libertadores final, scoring 2 goals along the way in that competition. And I did get a chance to watch him in the final, as well as some other clips, like longer game clips. So I've probably seen, other than what the 63 or 75 minutes he played in the final, as well as like maybe 25 other minutes of his action. I can tell he's going to disappoint Kool-Aid's. Like he's going to disappoint Kool-Aid's, but he might be exactly what Xavi wants, which again is the stuff that you and I, Emile, get excited about because his work rate. I know, like when you
Yeah.
say Brazilian forward, people expect something and they want something. Right? They want instant goals. They want instant gratification
Well,
with that.
they want Neymar, they want Ronaldo,
Exactly.
Nazario,
But just from
Romario.
you,
Yeah.
like you're going to see names like young Ronaldo. You're going to see Sergio Aguero. You're going to see Luis Suarez because he is a bit stocky.
I
Physically, he's kind of already up to it. But his
I've
goal
read the
scoring,
Suarez thing a lot. They
yeah,
apparently they keep calling him the Luis Suarez of Brazil or something.
right, because he's pretty wide. Like he's already physical at that age. But again, his work rate is what I'm excited about. He's his top 3% for interceptions among all forwards, and he's in the top 11% in tackles. He's top 25% in shot creating actions and successful take-ons. Two skills that again should only improve with experience. So his shot creating actions and successful take-ons could get even better in like a year or two time when he's 19. He also has an ability to start out wide on the right and either call his own number or create space for a teammate. Again, that's just that creation of space is another thing that obviously, if Xavi says, "Hey, Ferran Torres, can you do this thing?" Bring in Roca is important because you're saying, "Hey, Lewandowski's 34, going to be 35, or 35 now, going to be 36. Can we
Yeah.
replace him? How soon?" That A brings in that, and that A again brings in his successor in theory, and then part two of that is that Vitor Roca may be able to play in a different position that Xavi even needs him to be, as this false nine or forward in a certain position. So I like his versatility. I think he's got a lot of things in his game, not only that can improve, but are already at a decent level that isn't going to fall completely flat. It's not like he is this one trick pony that he just goes out on the left wing, like we see a lot of Brazilian wingers. They go out on the left wing and then they have some fun for 5 minutes, right? And it works in the Brazilian league, but it doesn't work in the Liga. And he doesn't in that way look like a normal Brazilian young teenage prospect. He looks like a player that fits into a system and more. I mean, with how pragmatic and dogmatic Xavi is, that is exactly what I'm looking for.
Yep. Yeah, I think like you. I mean, I think I've actually seen probably less of him than you, but I've taken to YouTube to see what's up, and yeah, I mean, the yeah, I think what he delivers is what Javi wants, what this team needs. It's not. Yeah, like the work rate, and I know that was missing. Just a lot, even in the last couple of years of Messi. Like just the pressing from the front and that kind of thing. Just hasn't been there to the same level that it was. Sort of in the previous decade or dozen years or whatever when this club reached the pinnacle. And at the age that he's at, and he what I really like him, yeah, he looks like a very strong, solid player. Like he's not sort of wispy. You're not like he doesn't look like a kid. Just
Yep.
sometimes you see like these super young guys, and you're like, okay, I can project, and but you're doing so much projection, and you're thinking, how is he going to put on weight? Is he going to put on weight? Is that going to mess him up? Is that going to make him slower? Just all of this kind of stuff. Like, okay, this guy, like he looks like a sturdy, solid player. So I'm
Yeah.
not worried about him playing against men and getting roughed up. And yeah, if you're a tireless worker, there, like that would be hugely helpful for this club if you could just throw another person like that into the mix here.
Yep. Speaking of hard workers, I don't really have any time to talk about this, but there is news that Alexia Putellas has finally begun training again, which is great news. She's
Yes.
still a ways away from return if it does come this season, but it's great news that she's training again. And the
Yep.
team also has been drawn to face Roma in the quarterfinals of the Champions League. So,
Yep.
kind of those things tied together. The announcement of Roma in the quarterfinals, which Roma are leading the Italian league. They finished second in the group behind Wolfsburg.
Yep.
Not say it's a favorable draw for Barca, but it kind of is like
It's
Barcelona's
a it's the
pedigree and
best of the it's the best of the three
yeah,
they could have gotten. It was
I would
either
argue that. Yeah, I
them,
would agree with
Leon,
that.
or Chelsea.
And
Yeah.
again, looking at Alexia, you go, wait a second, is Barcelona going to be the team that is? I think between them and Lyon and PSG and all the injuries to some of those big
Mhm.
the contenders, the fact that Barcelona might be at their healthiest when
Yeah.
it's time to get to the semifinals or be in the finals of the Champions League, I think that's going to help this team out quite a bit. So I am at this again juncture. Of course, they win every Liga game. I mean, Premier game. They win every domestic game, sure, but
Yep.
they're as far as their Champions League window, they are in theory potentially going to be at their healthiest in a way that other teams won't be when the lights are brightest. And that's what I'm optimistic about right now.
Well, it's true, and I think yeah, they are presumably going to get healthier. I don't know what the status of Carolyn Graham Hansen's injury is, but presumably I haven't read anything that says she's out for the year, so presumably she'll be back at some point.
In a few weeks, yeah,
During
that's what I've heard too.
during this Champions League run, because yeah, it's like March 21st or something is the first leg of the quarters, and between her and Aitana is she started the season injured and she's working herself basically back to peak condition, and she's been spectacular. And I mean, there's just so and like whatever it's the I guess it's the upside of building an absolute juggernaut is just they have so much depth and just quality. Like, you can just rattle off just five or six world class names at every
Mhm.
place. Yeah, and I think just given, yeah, especially previously, I would have said either Arsenal. I think PSG is probably the biggest threat this year in the Champions League
Yeah,
for Barca. But yeah, I mean, I think with Arsenal and Lyon, and I think
Chelsea.
Chelsea's been hit by injuries as
Yeah,
well. Yeah, so I mean, I think just everyone who's been hit by injuries to really key players, with the possible exception of Lyon. I don't know how many of them, Lyon and PSG. I don't know how many of them have the same level of depth at the same level
right,
to sort of I mean, Barca's lost to lose Alexia or Carolyn Graham Hansen would be a crippling blow to most teams.
right.
Barca have lost both, and you know, basically look like they haven't skipped a beat.
Yep, and trudged on, and we trudge on
Yep.
as well. Thankfully, football is back. So, if you were bored by this podcast because we were doing a lot of off-field stuff, well, get excited because next week it's Villarreal, which is going to be a tough one on Sunday, and then it's Manchester United. I'm going to have a preview out on that for YouTube. So there's going to be no post Villarreal podcast, but there's going to be a Villarreal 5 headlines attached to the podcast before we preview Manchester United. So that's what's going to be happening with that show midweek, and then we'll review Manchester United likely next Friday. So look forward to all of that stuff. I got to watch Manchester United against Leeds United, but took some notes, but those are not as many notes as I'm going to need, and going to have to keep figuring that out, working that preview. But until that time, we hope you enjoyed another edition of the show. That's Emile. I'm Dan. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, all those different places, Facebook, Patreon, YouTube, TikTok, Discord, merch store. I always forget that we have a merch store. Yeah, I'm always wearing it. So yeah, there's the merch store. So thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Forza Barca.
Forza Barca.